In the California desert lies a lawless patch of earth called Slab City. There are no laws, there are no police, and there isn't anyone around for miles. This is a story about a lone traveler that camped too close to this city. He told me how he discovered a tribe of feral humans that live beneath the abandoned military ruins there. It seems what begun as a photography trip turned into a terrifying fight for survival, and it's far from being over. Welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and become part of our ever-growing community of the curious. My name is Daniel, and I live in Oceanside, California. I work construction and spend most of my off days doing photography. Nothing professional, mostly abandoned places, weird desert stuff, and graffiti. That's how I ended up in Slab City back in March of this year. I'd been out to the Salton Sea before, mostly around Bombay Beach and the East Shoreline. I wanted something different this time, something raw. A guy at work told me I should check out Slab City, the last lawless city in America, if I really wanted to capture the end of the world in real life. I'd heard about it, but I'd never actually gone. So I planned a weekend trip. Just me, my camera, my tent, and a cooler. I left Oceanside on a Friday morning around 7 a.m., and I drove through Anza toward Highway 86. The desert was calm, bright, and hot already. I stopped in Brawley for gas, grabbed some water, and made it to Nyland just after noon. If you've been there, you know the deal. Burned-out houses, stray dogs, and a gas station that feels like it's barely holding on. From Nyland, I took Beale Road straight toward Slab City. You can see Salvation Mountain from a distance, that weird pastel hill sticking out of the desert like some kind of beacon. I parked there first, walked around, took some pictures, and I saw a couple of volunteers were repainting the steps. One guy looked at me and said, "You camping at the slabs tonight?" I told him, yeah, that was the plan. He lowered his voice a little and said, "Don't wander too far after dark, lot of strange folks out there lately." I thought he meant drugs or theft or something like that. I told him thanks and got back in my car. When I pulled into Slab City, I honestly didn't know where to start. It was bigger than I expected. Old RVs, school buses, tents made out of pallets and tarps, random art installations that looked like they'd been built out of trash and bones. Some spots were lively. You could hear music, generators, people talking. Other spots were dead silent, like no one had set foot there in years. I figured I'd camp on the edge, somewhere quiet. I drove past the range, past the library, past a few burned-out trailers. Eventually, I found a spot near some old concrete slabs with enough distance from the bigger encampments where I wouldn't bother anyone. I set up my tent, unloaded my cooler, and walked around with my camera. I like documenting decay, old furniture, broken windows, empty shells of cars. Slab City is full of that stuff, but it's different when you're standing in it. There's this feeling like the desert is eating everything alive, and the people living there are just trying to stay ahead of it. About an hour before sunset, I decided to walk toward East Jesus. I'd been told the art installations out there were cool. Most people were friendly, but some were off. Not in a violent way, just spaced out, sunburned, slow-moving. A woman in a long coat in the 90-degree heat followed me for a while, asking if I'd seen her shadow twin. When I told her no, she said, "You'll see them. Everyone sees them eventually." Then she wandered into the desert. The sun went down around 6:30. I headed back to my camp before it got too dark. My tent was still there, everything untouched. The desert got quiet fast once the sun dropped. No wind, no bugs, nothing. I could hear voices from far away, but they were faint. I made myself a sandwich, sat on my folding chair, and just listened. Around 8 p.m., I heard footsteps behind my tent. Not like an animal. These were slow, careful, human steps. I turned on my flashlight and walked around, but didn't see anyone. just tracks in the sand, bare footprints, deep heel marks, like whoever it was walking strangely. That put me on edge. About 20 minutes later, someone yelled from far off. It didn't sound like a fight or anything, more like someone calling a name. Then another voice further out yelled something back. I could hear maybe 3 or 4 people scattered in the dark, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. I tried to sleep around 10, but I kept hearing movement out in the desert. Something soft, like dragging or sliding in the sand. My tent was lit up by the moonlight, and at one point I swear I saw a shadow pass by slow, low to the ground. At 1:30 a.m., I finally unzipped the tent and looked outside. It was cold by then, maybe in the low 50s. I saw people standing about 50 yards away. They weren't moving, just standing there in the moonlight facing toward me. They were thin, like dangerously thin. Their arms hung straight down, and their heads were all tilted to the side. I called out, "Hey, you guys okay?" They didn't answer and didn't move. I stood there another 10 seconds, then turned my flashlight on, and as soon as the beam hit them, they ducked down, not like someone trying to hide, but like a spider collapsing its legs. The motion didn't look normal. It was too fast and too fluid. Then they all disappeared behind a pile of concrete. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By sunrise, I was exhausted, and I was trying to convince myself that they were just some strung-out locals messing with me. I packed up some of my stuff and walked the area to see if I could find tracks. There were barefoot prints everywhere around my tent, not just one set. There was 3 or 4 different sizes, overlapping each other, circling my camp. That's when I started feeling genuinely uneasy. Late morning, I drove into town to buy more ice. When I got back, a guy was sitting on a busted refrigerator near my site. Skinny dude, sunburned, wearing jeans 3 sizes too big, no shoes, no shirt. His hair was all tangled and had bits of weed stuck in it. He didn't look drunk or high. He looked empty, like he'd been living out there for decades. He smiled at me when I got out of the car. His teeth were brown and broken. "You're the one they were watching last night," he said, and pointed toward the desert behind my tent. He said, "Don't camp alone. They'll come back." Then he stood up and walked away. I noticed he had a limp, and his left leg dragged behind him. I should have left then, I know that. But I'd seen weird people before in the desert, and I didn't want to abandon the trip after only one night. So around noon, I drove to the range and talked to a couple of locals. They told me there weren't many rules in Slab City, but most people kept to themselves. When I asked if there were groups wandering around at night, 2 guys exchanged a look. One of them said, "If you hear something crawling near your tent, don't open it. They'll take it as an invitation." I asked, "Who?" He shrugged. "Depends who you ask. Some say they're just locals turned feral. Some say they're from the bombing range. Some say they're born out here. But they're real." The other guy added, "Just don't camp alone. Or better yet, don't camp at all." I told them I'd think about moving my site, but one of them said, "Doesn't matter if you move. They already know where you sleep." That stuck with me. By late afternoon, I felt watched again. Every time I walked between the slabs or looked down the dirt roads, I thought I saw someone ducking behind a trailer or crouching behind tires. There's a lot of open space in Slab City, but you never feel alone. People pop out of nowhere. They stare at you, whisper to themselves, watch you quietly. Around sunset, I noticed something strange near my camp. A pile of rocks had been stacked next to the slab where I slept. I hadn't done it. No one had been near my camp when I left for the day. On top of the rocks was a strip of fabric, red, sun-faded, tied into a knot. It looked like part of a shirt or maybe a blanket. I kicked the pile over. I don't know why. Maybe I was frustrated. Maybe I didn't like the idea of someone marking my site, but I shouldn't have done that. In hindsight, that was a real mistake. That night is when everything went wrong. At 7:30, I was eating dinner when someone screamed from far off, Not a playful scream, not a drunk scream, a real, terrified scream. It was a woman, and it echoed across the whole desert. A few dogs started barking. Someone yelled, "Shut up!" from another camp. The scream came again, but this time it was cut short, like someone clamped a hand around her mouth. I stood there frozen. I didn't know whether to run, call 911, or pretend I hadn't heard anything. A few seconds later, I saw movement near a cluster of broken trailers. 3 shapes moved quickly between them, too fast, too quiet, like they were coordinated. I packed up my gear and shoved it into my car. I grabbed my keys and tried to start the car, but the engine wouldn't turn over, like the battery was dead. I sat in the front seat with my doors locked and the windows barely cracked, trying to convince myself it was just people messing around. At 10:12 p.m., and I remember the exact time because I kept checking my phone that had no signal. Something brushed against the side of my car, not hard, just a slow drag, like someone ran their hand along the metal. I didn't move. Then something tapped the rear door. Not a knock, just a gentle tap, tap, tap. Then I heard whispering. Not words I could understand. Just low, breathy murmurs, like someone talking to themselves right outside my door. A minute later, the whispering stopped. The tapping stopped. Everything went silent. I stayed in the car until past midnight. Around 12:30, I finally leaned over and looked out the back window. Someone was crouched behind my tent. Not kneeling. Crouched low, hands on the ground, elbows out, like an animal about to spring. Their back was hunched, and their head was turned toward me, but I couldn't see their face. They were rocking slightly, like they were waiting. My chest tightened. I barely breathed. They stayed there, perfectly still, for I don't know how long. Then, without warning, they bolted into the darkness on all fours. I didn't sleep at all. I watched the sky until sunrise, and that's when I made the worst decision of the entire trip. I decided to follow the tracks I saw around my tent. That's what led me deeper into the slabs. That's what led me to the abandoned bunker. As I approached, I noticed something strange on the concrete wall. Someone had spray-painted a crude drawing, a stick figure, but with long arms bending down to the ground. Under it, someone wrote, "We don't talk about them." I should have left right then, but I didn't. I followed the prints to a broken stairwell that led underground. There was a dark opening carved out of the concrete, maybe a former storage room or bunker. The air coming out of it felt colder than it should have, and it smelled damp, rotten, like wet dog and old meat. I crouched down and looked inside. The room was maybe 10 feet across, littered with trash, old blankets, empty cans, pieces of fabric. But there were also bones, dozens of them. Some from animals, but some too big to be from dogs or coyotes, human-sized. I pulled out my phone to use the flashlight. That's when I heard movement behind me, and I turned around slowly. There was a guy standing maybe 20 feet away, half hidden behind a chunk of concrete. Not the guy from the fridge earlier, someone different, taller, barefoot, shirtless. His hair was a filthy blonde, sticking to his face like he'd been sweating all night. His ribs were sticking out sharp like they were carved into his skin. He wasn't looking at me at first. He was sniffing the air, like an animal. His head jerked toward me suddenly. His mouth hung open slightly, lips cracked and bleeding. His eyes were sunken but wide, like he hadn't slept in days or maybe weeks. I stood completely still. He tilted his head to the side the same way the figure had the night before. Then he stepped toward me. I stumbled back into the bunker doorway and nearly fell down the steps. The man crouched low and let out this strange sound. Not a growl, not a scream, something like a moan mixed with a gasp. Then another sound came from deeper inside the bunker. A reply, a second voice. Lower, raspy. My whole body tightened. That's when it hit me. There weren't just a couple of these people. There was a group, maybe a whole pack. The deeper I moved into the dark, the colder and wetter the air felt. That's when I saw something piled in the corner: blankets, trash, bones, fabric, and something else. A shoe. A woman's shoe. I thought maybe it was the shoe of the lady that was screaming the night before. Another cave-like tunnel opened up at the far end of the bunker. The phone light barely reached it, but I could hear movement down there. Crawling, shuffling, and wet breaths. I turned around just as the barefoot man lunged. He didn't jump like a normal person. He threw his body forward like someone diving into a pool, arms extended, fingers clawing for anything to latch onto. I ducked to the right, and he slammed into the wall full force. His bones sounded like they cracked, but he didn't react. He pushed off the wall and swung at me with his arm. His nails were long, caked with dirt. He clipped the side of my face, and I felt a hot sting as his nail cut into my cheek. That's when I ran. I sprinted up the broken steps, sunlight hitting me like a blast furnace. Behind me, I heard him scrambling on all fours, feet and hands slapping the concrete, his breath gurgling like he had fluid in his lungs. When I reached the top, I tripped on a slab edge and fell hard onto the sand. Pain shot up my knee, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward my car. He was fast, way faster than someone that malnourished should have been. I didn't look back until I was 50 feet from my car. When I turned, I saw not one, but 3 figures emerging from behind the slab, the blonde one, a darker-haired one moving with a limp but still fast, and a third, shorter figure that crawled more than walked. They weren't chasing in a straight line. They zigzagged. Their bodies jerked in strange angles, but their speed never slowed. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them once. When I finally got the door open, I dove inside and slammed the lock. The blonde one reached the car first and slammed his hands against the window. His palms left dirty smears and his breath fogged the glass. He pressed his forehead against it, eyes wide and vibrating like he was shaking internally. The other 2 circled the car. I tried to start the engine, and by some miracle it turned over. He let out a sharp, broken scream. I floored it. The tires kicked up sand and the car swerved before catching traction. I tore down the dirt trail toward Beale Road. In my rearview mirror, I saw them chasing for a moment, not running, bounding. Their arms swung wide like pendulums, helping them push forward faster. But eventually, they slowed. Or gave up. I don't know. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe again until I hit the paved part of Beale Road near Salvation Mountain. I didn't stop at the mountain, and I didn't stop in Brawley. I just kept driving until I hit El Centro, where I finally pulled over behind a gas station and tried to calm down. My face was bleeding. My shirt was torn, and there were scratches on the side of my car where the blonde one had clawed at it. But what scared me the most, what still scares me, were the sounds I heard once I stopped the car from the trunk area. Soft tapping, like something hitting the inside of the panel. I opened the trunk slowly, terrified they had somehow climbed inside before I escaped, but there was nothing there. Just the tapping continuing even after the trunk was open. Then it stopped. At that point, I drove home as fast as I could. I kept checking the back seat, kept watching the mirrors, kept expecting to see something crouched behind me. That night, I barely slept. I convinced myself I was just traumatized, imagining noises. But the next morning, when I went outside to look at my car, I noticed something that made my blood go cold. In the dust on my driveway, there were prints, bare footprints, just like the tracks around my tent. Toes pointed toward the house. That meant they had followed my car. I contacted the police, but they didn't believe me. They said the footprints were probably from kids or neighborhood people. They told me Slab City attracts unstable individuals, but that feral humans living underground wasn't something they could investigate. My friends think I had some kind of heat stroke or desert paranoia episode. My brother told me I probably saw addicts. But I know addicts don't move like that. Humans don't move like that. They don't make those sounds. They don't coordinate hunts. Someone out there knows what these people are. Someone out there lives near them. Someone out there feeds them or hides from them. Because the Slab City locals weren't shocked. They weren't surprised. They weren't confused. They were afraid. I'll tell you what really terrified me, though. Something I didn't want to include, but I have to. The one night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to the same tapping I heard in my trunk that day. But this time, it wasn't on my car. It was on my bedroom window. Slow, steady. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't look and I didn't move. I just laid there listening until the tapping stopped. I know what I saw. I know what chased me. And I know they weren't human. There is something that crawls beneath the slabs. Something that watches. I told myself that if anything else happened after the tapping on my window, I'd move. I'd pack up, quit my job if I had to, and leave California entirely. But nothing happened the next night, or the one after that. So I tried to go back to normal life. The morning after the tapping on my bedroom window, I walked the perimeter of my property. I checked the bushes, the backyard fence line, behind the trash cans, everywhere. No prints this time, no disturbed dirt, nothing leaning against the house or hiding under it. Around noon, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Why did you leave the slabs? We like you." No name, no context, nothing else. I stared at it for 10 minutes trying to make sense of it. I didn't respond. I deleted the message and then I blocked the number. 2 days later, I drove back to Nyland. Not because I wanted to, because I needed answers. I figured maybe somebody there would tell me the full story instead of the cryptic warnings I'd gotten before. I parked near Salvation Mountain and walked around until I found one of the volunteers from my first visit, the older guy with the faded hat. He recognized me and said, "You came back. Didn't think you would." I told him what I experienced. Not everything, but enough. The crouching guy behind my tent, the 3 people who chased me, the bunker with bones, the tapping on my window, the message about the red cloth. His face tightened. He scratched at his beard and looked around like he wanted to make sure no one was close enough to hear us. Then he said something that stuck with me more than anything else. "You saw who they call the wrong ones." I asked him what that meant. He shook his head. "I'm not talking about drugs or tweakers or drifters. The wrong ones were here before most of the slabs. They are the people who stayed after the military base closed. They've been half buried out there for decades." I told him they moved fast. Too fast. He nodded like he already knew. They don't eat right. They don't sleep right. They don't think right. And they don't like when outsiders disturb them. He just said, "They hunt by night. They always have. People go missing all the time and most are just forgotten. But some aren't really gone at all. They are just taken underground." I tried to ask more, but he shut down after that and walked away. That evening, I stopped by a small shop near Neyland to get a drink. The owner, a woman in her 60s, stared at me like she could see something wrong. "You been down the road?" she asked. I nodded. "You see him?" "Yeah." She sucked her teeth and said, "Then you best pray they didn't follow you." My stomach dropped. "They know how to track cars. It's how they find people who leave. You better watch your windows at night." I told her about the tapping. She closed the register drawer and said softly, "Then they found you. And they aren't done." I still hear things at night sometimes. Not every night, just often enough to keep me on alert. 2 weeks later, my neighbor, who never talks to anybody, mentioned something strange. He said he saw a thin man crouched under the streetlight across from our houses at around 4 a.m., staring at my place. Said the man ran off when a car came down the road. When I asked what the man looked like, he thought for a moment and said, "Like he hadn't eaten in weeks. His arms were too long. He wasn't right." The same description I'd been trying to forget. Last month, someone left something on my porch. A rock. Just one. A flat one, about the size of my palm. and tied around it was a strip of faded red fabric, same knot as the one at my camp. No note, no footprints, no clues, just the rock. I keep the lights on. I keep 3 locks on each door. I sleep with a crowbar next to the bed. And yet I know none of it means anything if they really want to come inside. I don't know how many there are. I don't know how far they roam. I don't know if they're sick, mutated, broken, or mentally gone. All I know is this: they watched me, they followed me, they marked me, and I think they're waiting for me to come back. And so, another strange encounter fades away. A trick of the mind, or something far more unsettling. That's for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching my stories. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel going.